The ancient law had been written in blood centuries ago, and now it demanded Delilah Owens become the bride of a monster. She stood in the marble hall of what could only be described as an underground palace, her hands trembling as two pale-skinned attendants with hair like moonlight adjusted the ivory gown they'd forced her into. The fabric felt like silk water against her skin, beautiful and suffocating all at once. 23 years old, a graduate student in art history, and somehow her entire life had been reduced to this single moment because her great-great-great-grandmother had signed a treaty no one told her existed until 3 days ago. "The king approaches," one of the attendants whispered, her crimson eyes glinting with something Delilah couldn't identify. Fear? Excitement? Both women stepped back in perfect synchronization, melting into the shadows along the cathedral height walls. Delilah's heart hammered against her ribs as the massive oak doors at the far end swung open without a sound. The vampire who entered moved with liquid grace that made her breath catch, despite her terror. He was tall, easily 6'4", with skin so pale it seemed to glow in the candlelight. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of pure white, and when his eyes found her across the distance, they burned like molten silver. Vladric Godfrey, the vampire king of the Eastern Territories. Her husband as of 3 hours ago, according to a ceremony she'd been too numb to fully process. He wore black from head to toe, his coat embroidered with silver thread in patterns that reminded her of ancient runes. Everything about him screamed power, from the way he held himself to the absolute silence that followed in his wake. She'd seen photographs of CEOs and presidents, people who commanded rooms with their presence. This was different. This was primal. "You're trembling," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in her chest. He'd stopped about 10 feet away, as if aware that coming closer might send her running. "Are you cold?" "I'm terrified," Delilah replied, lifting her chin even as her voice shook. If she was going to be trapped in this nightmare, she wouldn't be meek about it. Let's not pretend otherwise. Something flickered across his perfect features. Surprise, maybe. He tilted his head slightly, studying her with an intensity that made her feel naked despite the layers of silk and lace. "Honest, I appreciate that more than you know. Most humans presented to me either faint or attempt false bravado. You do neither. I considered fainting," she admitted, wrapping her arms around herself. "But I figured I'd wake up and still be here, so what's the point?" The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "The law that binds us is ancient. Your family line pledged service to mine during the Great Purge of 1823. My grandfather spared your ancestors when others of your bloodline were hunted to extinction. In return, the Owens family promised a bride from their line when called upon. And you're calling it in now, 200 years later?" Delilah's hands curled into fists. "My parents didn't tell me because they thought the vampires were extinct or had forgotten. We live normal lives. I was working on my thesis about Renaissance art. I have an apartment, friends, a life that doesn't involve being property." Vladric's expression hardened. "You are not property. You are my consort, bound by law and magic, but you will never be chattel in my domain." "Semantics," she shot back. "I didn't choose this. I didn't even know your world existed until men with red eyes showed up at my door and told me I had 48 hours to prepare for a wedding." He moved then, closing the distance between them in a blur of motion that proved exactly what he was. Delilah gasped, stumbling backward, but he caught her elbow with surprising gentleness. This close, she could see the inhuman perfection of his features, the way his skin held an otherworldly luminescence. He smelled like night air and something darker, richer. Ancient forests, maybe. Old books and expensive wine. "I know this is not what you wanted," Vladric said quietly, his thumb brushing against the inside of her wrist. Could he feel her pulse racing? But the law exists for reasons that go beyond simple tradition. There are factions within my world who would see me destroyed. A king without a bonded consort is seen as weak, vulnerable. You fulfill a requirement that keeps my throne secure, and by extension, keeps the peace between our species intact. So I'm a political pawn. You're my wife. The word seemed to carry weight when he said it, as if it meant something far more than the human equivalent. "And I swear to you, Delilah Owens, that I will protect you with everything I am. You may not have chosen this bond, but I will spend however long it takes to make you understand that you are valued here." She wanted to argue, to scream at the unfairness of it all. But the sincerity in his silver eyes made her pause. This wasn't some monstrous creature gloating over his captive. He looked almost regretful, determined, certainly, and far too intense for comfort, but there was something genuine beneath the supernatural power radiating off him. "I want to see my family," Delilah said instead. "My parents, my little brother. They need to know I'm okay. Arrangements will be made. You have my word." Vladric released her arm, stepping back to give her space. You must be exhausted. I'll have attendants show you to your chambers. They're connected to mine, but there is a door with a lock. You may use it whenever you wish. That surprised her enough that she blinked. You're giving me a locked door? Doesn't that defeat the purpose of a marriage? His smile was sad, ancient. This marriage was forced upon you. I'll not compound that violation by taking what isn't freely given. When you come to me, it will be your choice. Until then, you have my respect and my protection, nothing more. Before she could respond, he turned and strode from the hall, leaving her standing alone in her wedding dress with more questions than answers. The chambers turned out to be a suite of rooms that would have made any luxury hotel weep with envy. High ceilings painted with murals of night skies, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum, and a bed large enough to fit 6 people comfortably. Floor-to-ceiling windows showed a view that made Delilah's stomach drop. They were definitely underground, but somehow the glass looked out onto what appeared to be a starlit forest. Magic, she realized. It had to be some kind of enchantment. A young woman with the same pale skin and white hair as the others appeared in the doorway. She couldn't have been more than 18 in human years, though Delilah had no idea how vampire aging worked. My lady, I'm Seraphine. I've been assigned as your personal attendant. If you need anything at all, you have only to ask of information. Delilah said immediately, sitting down on an ornate chair because her legs suddenly felt weak. I need to understand what my life looks like now. What are the rules? What's expected of me? And why now? Why did Vladric wait 2 centuries to call in this debt? Seraphine's crimson eyes widened slightly, but she recovered quickly. I can answer some of that. As the king's consort, you're afforded protection and status second only to His Majesty himself. No vampire in the realm may harm you without facing immediate execution. You're free to move about the palace, though venturing to the surface requires guards until you're more familiar with our world. And the expectations? You're to attend court functions at the king's side. Learn our customs, our history. In time, if the bond strengthens, there may be a blood exchange that would extend your life and grant you some protections against our weaknesses. Seraphine hesitated. As for why now, there are rumors. The Western territories have been making aggressive moves. Their king, Lazarus, believes Vladric's line has grown weak. He's challenged the legitimacy of the throne 3 times in the past decade. A consort bond, especially one sealed by ancient law, is impossible to dispute. It shores up His Majesty's position according to traditions even Lazarus must respect. So she really was a political pawn. Delilah closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She wouldn't cry. Not now. Not where they could see her break. The king has never taken a consort before, Seraphine added quietly. In 500 years, he's remained unbonded. Many thought he never would. Your arrival has caused quite a stir among the court. 500 years old. Delilah tried to wrap her mind around that number and failed. Why didn't he bond before? Surely this political vulnerability existed before now. That's not my place to say, my lady, but perhaps you should ask him yourself. He's not what most expect. Give him a chance before you make your final judgment. The attendant left her then with promises of bringing food, regular human food, she assured Delilah, not blood and the suggestion that she rest. But Delilah couldn't imagine sleeping. Instead, she explored the suite, finding a bathroom with a tub large enough to swim in, a library stocked with books in multiple languages, and a study with art supplies that made her heart ache. Someone had paid attention to her interests. Someone had tried to make this cage comfortable. She was examining a set of oil paints when she heard the door open. Vladric stood in the threshold, still dressed in black, his silver eyes finding her immediately. May I enter? The fact that he asked permission in what was technically his own palace said something. Delilah nodded, setting down the paint tube. It's your home. It's our home now, he corrected, moving into the room with that same predatory grace. I wanted to check on you before I attend to evening court business. Seraphine said you had questions. About 1,000 of them, Delilah admitted. She perched on the edge of a velvet sofa, and after a moment, Vladric sat in the chair across from her, maintaining distance. Why didn't you bond with anyone before? 500 years is a long time to leave yourself politically vulnerable. He was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. I was bonded once, 300 years ago. Her name was Isadora, and she was vampire nobility. Chosen by my father before his death. We were bonded for 70 years before she was killed by assassins from the Northern Territories during a peace negotiation. The pain in his voice was raw despite the centuries between him and the loss. Delilah felt her chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. I'm sorry. After her death, I swore I wouldn't bind myself to another of our kind. The politics, the power plays, the constant threat. I wouldn't subject another vampire to that target. But the challenges to my throne have escalated. Lazarus grows bolder. I needed a solution that would satisfy the ancient laws without putting another of my people at risk. So you chose a human bride because we're disposable? The words came out sharper than she intended. Vladric's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. No, I chose to fulfill an old debt because the magic that binds such oaths is unbreakable. No one can challenge its legitimacy. And I chose a human because your kind has a strength my people often lack: adaptability, creativity, the ability to see beyond centuries of tradition to new possibilities. He leaned forward, his intensity pinning her in place. You are not disposable, Delilah. You are invaluable, and I will spend every day proving that to you if necessary. The conviction in his voice made her breath catch. This was a king, an ancient predator, a being who could probably kill her with one hand, and he was looking at her like she mattered, like she was more than a convenient solution to his problem. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. I don't know how to be a vampire queen or consort or whatever I am now. You don't have to know. Not yet. Vladric stood, and this time when he approached, Delilah didn't flinch. He offered his hand, palm up, waiting. You only have to decide to try. One day at a time. I'll teach you everything you need to know, but I need to know you're with me in this. Not happily. Perhaps not even willingly at first, but at least present. Can you give me that? Delilah stared at his hand, pale, long-fingered, surprisingly elegant for something that could tear through steel. This was the moment of choice, she realized. She could retreat behind her locked door and hide from this new reality, or she could step forward and see where this impossible situation led. She took his hand. His skin was cool, but not cold, his grip firm but careful. One day at a time, she agreed, but I have conditions. A smile ghosted across his lips. Name them. I see my family regularly. I continue my education, even if it's modified for this new life. And you're honest with me about the dangers, the politics, all of it. I won't be kept in the dark and expected to smile and wave. Done. He squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. I'll arrange for your family to visit within the week. Seraphine will help you set up whatever educational materials you need. And I'll brief you on court politics starting tomorrow night. We have our first public appearance in 3 days, a gathering of the Eastern Territory's noble houses. They'll want to see you, assess you, determine if you're a weakness or a strength. No pressure then. Delilah muttered. Vladric's laugh was unexpected, a rich sound that transformed his austere features. You'll do fine. Better than fine. They're expecting a frightened human who'll cling to my arm and stammer. Show them the woman who looked me in the eye and called me out on my choices. They'll never see you coming. Over the next 3 days, Delilah was thrust into an intensive education on vampire society. Seraphine proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but thorough. The realm they lived in existed beneath one of the major cities. Delilah never got a straight answer on which one in a network of caverns and halls that had been expanded and refined over centuries. Magic sustained the lighting, the air, the enchanted windows that showed whatever view the beholder most desired. Vampire society was rigidly hierarchical but meritocratic in strange ways. Power came from age, bloodline, and accomplishment. Vladric ruled the Eastern Territories, which comprised roughly 1/3 of the vampire population in North America. There were 3 other territory kings, with Lazarus of the West being the most aggressive and problematic. He believes vampire purity is being diluted. Seraphine explained as she helped Delilah into an emerald green gown for the gathering. He thinks bonding with humans weakens our bloodlines, makes us vulnerable. The king choosing a human consort is going to infuriate him. Won't that make things worse? Delilah asked, watching as the attendant arranged her dark hair into an intricate updo that left a few curling tendrils framing her face. In the short term, possibly. But long term, it shows strength. The king isn't afraid of Lazarus's disapproval. He's making a statement that he'll rule as he sees fit, according to ancient laws that predate Lazarus's house by centuries. When Delilah finally saw herself in the full-length mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. The gown hugged her curves before flowing to the floor in layers of silk. Emeralds glittered at her throat, and ears gifts from Vladric that had arrived that morning with a note in elegant script, to match your eyes and complement your fire. A knock at the door made her jump. Vladric entered, and the air seemed to shift around him. He wore formal attire that somehow made him look even more regal, his white hair pulled back partially to reveal the sharp lines of his face. When his silver eyes landed on her, they widened almost imperceptibly. "You're stunning," he said, and the awe in his voice sounded genuine. "They won't know what hit them. I feel like an imposter," Delilah admitted. 3 days ago, I was eating ramen in my apartment and stressing about thesis deadlines. He crossed to her, moving with that supernatural speed that still startled her, and offered his arm. 3 days ago, you were already extraordinary. Now you simply look the part. Stay close to me. If anyone says anything that makes you uncomfortable, squeeze my arm twice. I'll extract us from the conversation. The gathering was held in what Vladric called the Great Hall, a cavernous space with vaulted ceilings covered in frescoes depicting vampire history. Hundreds of vampires filled the room, all pale-skinned, white-haired, beautiful in that unsettling way that marked them as other. Conversation hummed through the space until Vladric entered with Delilah on his arm. Then silence fell like a guillotine blade. Every crimson eye in the room turned to stare at her. Delilah felt her heart rate spike, but she forced herself to keep her chin up and her expression calm. She was being evaluated, judged, probably found wanting by most of these immortal creatures. But she'd be damned if she'd cower. Vladric led her through the crowd, introducing her to noble houses with names she'd never remember. Most were politely curious, a few openly skeptical. Then they reached a knot of vampires near the center of the hall, and Delilah felt Vladric's arm tense beneath her hand. The vampire at the center of the group was slightly shorter than Vladric, but broader through the shoulders. His white hair was cropped close to his skull, and his eyes glowed with an intensity that made Delilah's skin crawl. When he smiled, his fangs were very visible. "Vladric," the vampire said, his voice carrying across the sudden hush that had fallen around them. "How unexpected to see you've finally taken a consort. And a human, no less." "How progressive, Lazarus," Vladric replied, his tone glacial. "I wasn't aware you'd be attending tonight. The Western Territories are quite a distance from here. I came to see if the rumors were true." Lazarus's gaze raked over Delilah with undisguised contempt. "Tell me, girl, do you have any idea what you've gotten yourself into? Or did our king simply dazzle you with power and pretty promises?" Delilah felt rage cut through her fear. She'd been terrified, overwhelmed, and completely out of her depth for days. But this arrogant creature looking at her like she was dirt on his shoe ignited something fierce in her chest. "I know that I'm here by ancient law your kind established. I know that I'm bonded to a king who honors his word and protects his people. And I know that questioning the legitimacy of our bond is tantamount to challenging the very traditions you claim to hold so dear. So perhaps you should think carefully about what you say next." The silence that followed was absolute. Lazarus's eyes widened, then narrowed dangerously. But before he could respond, Vladric spoke, his voice carrying a threat that made several nearby vampires step back. "My consort has just given you more courtesy than you deserve. I suggest you accept it and move along before I decide that your presence here constitutes a provocation." For a moment, Delilah thought Lazarus would push the confrontation. His hand twitched toward his side where she assumed a weapon might be concealed, but then he smiled coldly and inclined his head a bare inch. "Of course! Congratulations on your bonding, your majesty. I'm sure it will be memorable." He swept away with his entourage, leaving a wake of uncomfortable murmurs. Vladric guided Delilah toward a quieter corner, his hand covering hers on his arm. That was either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. "Probably both," she admitted, her hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "But I wasn't going to let him talk to me like that. Or to you." Something in Vladric's expression shifted. He looked down at her with an intensity that made her stomach flutter. "You defended me. You barely know me. You didn't choose this bond, and yet you stood against one of the most dangerous vampires in existence to defend my honor." "He was being an asshole," Delilah said simply. "I don't like bullies." Vladric's laugh was low and genuine. "You are remarkable. Come, let's make a few more rounds and then escape. I think you've earned some respite from the political theater." They stayed another hour, and Delilah found herself relaxing slightly as other nobles approached with genuine curiosity rather than hostility. Several of the younger vampires seemed fascinated by her human perspective, asking questions about modern technology and culture with endearing enthusiasm. One female vampire named Celestine even complimented Delilah's gown and asked where she'd studied art. By the time Vladric led her from the hall, Delilah's feet ached and her head spun with names and faces, but she felt a small spark of accomplishment. She'd survived. More than that, she'd held her own. "You did exceptionally well," Vladric said as they walked through the quieter corridors toward their chambers. "Several of my advisors have already sent word that they're impressed with your composure. I was terrified the entire time. That makes your performance all the more impressive." He paused outside the door to her rooms. "Delilah, what you said to Lazarus, that took courage. But it also painted a target on your back. He doesn't forgive challenges to his authority. Are you saying I should have kept quiet? Let him insult both of us. No. Vladric's hand came up to cup her cheek, the gesture startling in its tenderness. I'm saying I'm grateful beyond words that you stood with me. But I need you to understand that this makes you more than a political symbol. It makes you a statement, and statements attract danger. Delilah leaned into his touch before she could think better of it. His palm was cool against her skin, steady and grounding. Then I guess you'll have to keep that promise about protecting me. With my life, he said quietly. I swear it. He left her at her door with a formal bow that somehow felt intimate. Delilah retreated to her chambers, her mind whirling. She barely knew this vampire king, and yet something was shifting between them. Something that terrified her almost as much as the idea of being stuck in a loveless political marriage. The next week fell into a strange routine. Mornings, or what passed for mornings in the underground realm, where time was marked by clocks rather than sunlight, Delilah spent studying vampire history and etiquette with Seraphine. Afternoons, Vladric would join her for meals in a private dining room, and they'd talk. At first, the conversations were stilted, careful, but gradually they began to open up. Delilah learned that Vladric had been turned during the Renaissance, that he'd once studied music and could play 6 instruments. He told her about the centuries he'd spent building his territory, the wars fought and peace treaties signed. His favorite blood type was B negative, he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. And he hadn't killed a human for food in over 200 years, since they'd established donation centers with willing participants. In turn, she told him about her childhood, her love of art history, the thesis she'd been writing about the use of light in Caravaggio's work. She talked about her parents' small house in the suburbs, her brother's obsession with video games, the ordinary, precious details of a human life. Do you miss it? Vladric asked one evening as they sat in the library, a chessboard between them. He was teaching her the game, though she suspected he was letting her win more often than she deserved. Every day, Delilah admitted, moving her knight. But it's getting easier. This place is not what I expected. You're not what I expected. What did you expect? She met his silver eyes across the board. A monster. Someone cold and cruel who'd use me and discard me when I was no longer politically useful. And now? Now I see someone who's carrying the weight of an entire civilization on his shoulders. Someone who's lonely, I think, even surrounded by thousands of people. She hesitated, then added, someone I could maybe, eventually, care about. The chess piece Vladric had been holding clattered to the board. He stared at her with an expression she couldn't read. Delilah, before he could continue, the door burst open. A vampire Delilah recognized as one of Vladric's guards stood in the entrance, his face urgent. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The Western Territories delegation is demanding an audience. They claim right of challenge. Vladric was on his feet instantly. All trace of the contemplative man from moments before vanished beneath the mantle of kingship. How many? 15. Armed. Lazarus himself leads them. Gather the royal guard. No one enters the inner palace. I'll meet them in the formal receiving chamber. Vladric turned to Delilah, his expression fierce. Stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Seraphine. What's happening? Fear spiked through Delilah's chest. Lazarus is forcing the issue. He's invoking old laws to challenge my authority. I have to face him, but I won't risk you being anywhere near that confrontation. He gripped her shoulders, his gaze intense. Promise me you'll stay here. Promise me. I promise, Delilah whispered. But Vladric, be careful. Something flickered in his eyes. Then he did something completely unexpected. He leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead, a gentle kiss that seared through her. I'll return to you. I swear it. Then he was gone, moving with that supernatural speed, leaving Delilah standing alone in the library with her heart pounding. She did as he asked, returning to her chambers and locking the door. But she couldn't sit still. She paced the rooms, her mind conjuring worst-case scenarios. An hour passed. Then 2. Delilah was contemplating breaking her promise and going to find out what was happening when she heard shouting from somewhere distant. Then a sound like thunder or an explosion. The palace shook. No, Delilah breathed. She ran to the door, pressing her ear against it. More shouting. The clash of metal. Fighting. Someone was trying to kill Vladric. That certainty crystallized in her mind with perfect clarity. Lazarus hadn't come to talk. He'd come to eliminate a rival and claim the Eastern Territories for himself. The door to her chambers, not the one leading to the corridor, but the one connecting her rooms to Vladric's, suddenly opened. Delilah spun, her heart in her throat. But it was Seraphine, her face pale with fear. My lady, we have to move you. The palace is under attack. The Western forces broke through the outer defenses. The king is holding them in the main hall, but if he falls, he won't fall, Delilah said fiercely. Where is he? I need to see him. That's not safe. I don't care. Take me to him now. Seraphine looked torn, but something in Delilah's expression must have convinced her. Follow me. Stay close and stay silent. They moved through corridors Delilah had never seen, using servants' passages and hidden routes. The sounds of battle grew louder. When they finally reached a balcony overlooking the great hall, Delilah's blood ran cold. Below, Vladric fought with a grace that was terrible and beautiful. His blade moved like liquid silver, parrying attacks from multiple opponents at once. But he was outnumbered. Blood dark, almost black, stained his coat. He was injured. Lazarus stood at the edge of the fighting, watching with a satisfied expression. Yield, Vladric, he called. Your reign is over. The eastern territories deserve a stronger king. They have one, Vladric snarled, dispatching another attacker. But Delilah could see he was tiring. Vampires could heal from almost anything, but even they had limits. She had to do something. But what? She was human, powerless, completely out of her depth. Then her eyes landed on something near the edge of the balcony, a decorative torch, part of the hall's ancient decor. Fire. Vampires feared very little, but fire was one of those things. Without letting herself think, Delilah grabbed the torch and hurled it down into the hall. It landed in the midst of the western vampires, and flames erupted across the stone floor where oil from other fallen torches had spilled. The vampires scattered with hisses of fear and rage. Who dares? Lazarus's eyes tracked upward and found Delilah on the balcony. His face twisted with fury. The human! Guards, bring her to me! No! Vladric's roar shook the hall. He moved with speed that blurred reality, cutting through the vampires between him and the stairs leading to Delilah's position. But Lazarus was moving too, heading straight for her with murder in his eyes. Seraphine stepped in front of Delilah, her own small blade drawn. You'll have to go through me, my lord, gladly, Lazarus said, and struck with brutal efficiency. Seraphine went down with a cry. And then Lazarus's hand was around Delilah's throat, lifting her off the ground. She clawed at his grip, unable to breathe. This is what you bonded yourself to, Vladric? Lazarus called, dangling Delilah over the balcony railing. This fragile, breakable thing? Let me show you what happens to kings who forget their strength. Release her. Vladric's voice was utterly cold, utterly lethal. He stood at the base of the stairs, his blade lowered, his silver eyes blazing with a fury that made every vampire in the hall freeze. Release her now, or I will paint these walls with your blood and the blood of every vampire who followed you here. You're not in a position to make threats. I am the king of the Eastern Territories by right of blood, conquest, and ancient law. I have honored the old ways, kept the peace, and protected our kind for 5 centuries. You come into my home, attack my people, and threaten my consort. Vladric's power radiated outward, a palpable force that made the air crackle. I invoke the right of single combat. You and me, Lazarus, the winner takes all. But if I win, you and yours leave my territory and never return. Swear it on your bloodline. Lazarus's grip on Delilah's throat loosened slightly. She could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he smiled. Agreed, but when I win, the human dies first. Before your eyes. He dropped Delilah onto the balcony floor, and she gasped for air, her vision swimming. Seraphine crawled to her side, pressing a hand to her own bleeding shoulder. My lady, we need to go. No, Delilah wheezed. I stay. He's fighting for me. I won't hide from that. Below, the 2 kings faced each other. The other vampires had cleared a wide circle, forming an arena. Delilah forced herself to stand, gripping the balcony railing. She wouldn't look away. Whatever happened, she'd witness it. The fight that followed was like nothing Delilah had ever imagined. The 2 vampires moved faster than her eyes could track, their blades creating sparks where they collided. They were evenly matched in skill, but Vladric's earlier injuries slowed him fractionally. Lazarus pressed the advantage, driving him back. Blood flew. Dark, ancient blood that steamed when it hit the stone. Vladric took a slash across his ribs that would have killed a human instantly. But he kept fighting, his face set in grim determination. You're weakened by sentiment, Lazarus taunted, circling. That human has made you soft. The old Vladric would never have let an opponent land that strike. The old Vladric had nothing to fight for but duty, Vladric replied. Now I have something more, someone more. His eyes flicked up to Delilah for just a heartbeat. In that moment, something passed between them. Understanding, connection. Something that felt suspiciously like Lazarus attacked during that moment of distraction. His blade drove toward Vladric's heart. Time seemed to slow. Delilah screamed, the sound tearing from her throat. Vladric twisted at the last possible second, and the blade that would have pierced his heart instead ripped through his shoulder. He used the momentum to step inside Lazarus's guard, and his own blade came up in a brutal arc. The strike was perfect. Vladric's blade caught Lazarus beneath the ribs and drove upward, angled precisely toward where Delilah assumed a vampire's heart would be. Lazarus's eyes went wide. He staggered back, the blade still embedded in his chest. You wouldn't, Lazarus gasped. I told you, Vladric said quietly. Threaten what's mine, and I will end you. But I am a king of honor. I give you this choice. Accept exile and live, or force my hand and die here. Choose quickly. My mercy has limits. Lazarus looked around at his followers, then up at Delilah. Something like understanding crossed his face. You love her. Truly. A human. More than life, Vladric said. More than crown or kingdom. And that makes me stronger, not weaker. It gives me something worth protecting beyond politics and power. For a long moment, Lazarus was silent. Then he reached up and carefully removed Vladric's blade from his chest, his face contorting with pain. I accept exile. You win, Vladric. But know this others will come. Others who see your choice as treason against our kind. Let them come. I'll face them as I faced you. Vladric turned to Lazarus's followers. Take your king and go. You have safe passage until you reach the border. Then you're never to return to my territory. Break this accord, and there will be no mercy. The western vampires gathered their wounded leader and retreated in a subdued mass. As soon as they were gone, Vladric's knees buckled. Delilah was moving before she could think, racing down the stairs and across the hall. She caught him before he hit the ground, though he was far too heavy for her to actually hold up. Don't you dare die on me, she said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. Not now. Not after everything. I'm not dying, Vladric assured her, but his voice was weak. Just need. A moment. Blood loss, then feed. Do whatever you need to do. Just don't leave me. The words tumbled out before Delilah could stop them, raw and honest. I know this started as a forced bond. I know neither of us chose it. But I choose it now. I choose you. So you don't get to die. You don't get to leave. Vladric's eyes focused on her face, wide with shock. Delilah, she's right, Your Majesty, said an older vampire Delilah recognized as one of Vladric's advisors, approaching quickly. You need to feed to heal these wounds. We can provide donors. No, Delilah interrupted. She met Vladric's silver eyes steadily, knowing what she was about to offer, understanding the implications. Take from me. If you need blood to heal, take mine. That would begin the bonding process, Vladric said quietly. A true bond, not just the legal formality. Once begun, it can't be undone. You'd be connected to me for the rest of your life. Your human life or longer, if you chose to complete the transformation eventually. Are you certain? Delilah thought about the past weeks. The fear and confusion, yes, but also the conversations in the library. The way Vladric had given her space and respected her boundaries. How he'd fought an entire army to keep her safe. The moment in the middle of battle when he'd looked at her and she'd seen everything he felt written in his eyes. I'm certain, she said. I was falling for you anyway. Might as well make it official. A smile broke across Vladric's face, transforming his features. He reached up with a blood-stained hand and cupped her cheek. You are the most extraordinary woman I've met in 500 years. And I am falling catastrophically in love with you. Then he pulled her down and kissed her. His lips were cool but impossibly gentle, moving against hers with a reverence that made her heart ache. When he pulled back, his fangs were visible, extended. This will hurt for a moment, but then you'll feel pleasure. I promise. Do you trust me? Yes, Delilah breathed, and realized she meant it completely. Vladric's fangs pierced the skin of her neck with a sharp sting that made her gasp. Then, just as he'd promised, warmth flooded through her, not pain, but something that felt like golden sunlight in her veins, like every nerve ending lighting up at once. She felt Vladric's presence in her mind, his emotions twining with hers, gratitude, awe, protectiveness, and beneath it all, a love so deep and ancient it took her breath away. When he finally pulled back, his wounds were already closing, color returning to his pale skin. He licked the puncture marks on her neck, and she felt the skin seal beneath his tongue. The bond is begun, he said quietly. Can you feel it? Delilah nodded, unable to form words. She could sense him in the back of her mind, a steady presence that felt right. Like a piece she hadn't known was missing had finally clicked into place. The following days were a whirlwind. News of Lazarus's defeat and exile spread through the vampire world. Delegations from the other territories arrived to reaffirm their treaties with the eastern territories, and every one of them wanted to meet the human consort who'd changed the game. Delilah's family was finally allowed to visit, and the reunion was tearful and overwhelming. Her parents had been terrified, kept under guard in their home until the situation with Lazarus was resolved. Her younger brother, Marcus, oscillated between thinking the whole thing was incredibly cool and wanting to punch Vladric for taking his sister. I understand your anger, Vladric told the 19-year-old calmly as they sat in one of the palace's receiving rooms. If someone had taken my sister without her consent, I would have felt the same, but I can promise you that Delilah is safe here. She's protected, valued, and if she ever wishes to leave, I won't stop her. I don't want to leave, Delilah said firmly, taking Vladric's hand. The touch sent warmth through the bond they shared, and she saw his eyes soften. I choose to stay. I choose this life. I choose him. Her mother, a practical woman who'd spent 3 days researching vampire lore once she'd gotten over the initial shock, had questions about the bonding process, about Delilah's safety, about whether there were other human consorts she could talk to for advice. Vladric answered everything patiently, and by the end of the visit, even her father seemed cautiously accepting. You seem happy, her dad said quietly, pulling Delilah aside before they left. Genuinely happy, not just putting on a brave face. Are you? Delilah thought about waking up each morning to find Vladric reading in the library, how he'd look up and smile when she entered. The way he'd started teaching her to dance to music from 6 different centuries. How he'd listened to her theories about art history with genuine interest, asking questions that showed he was truly engaged. The nights they'd spent talking until dawn, or what passed for dawn in their underground world, sharing stories and dreams and fears. I am, she said honestly. I didn't expect to be. But Dad, he's good. He's kind and honorable, and he makes me laugh. And I make him happy too. I can feel it through our bond. This isn't the life I planned, but it's becoming the life I want. Her father hugged her tightly. Then I'm happy for you. But if he ever hurts you, Vampire King or not, I'm coming for him. Duly noted, Vladric said from across the room, his supernatural hearing having clearly caught every word. But he was smiling. 3 months after their forced marriage, Vladric asked Delilah if she wanted to complete the bonding ritual. They were in his study, their study. She'd started calling it going over reports about increased trade with the Northern Territories. The question came out of nowhere, making her look up from the documents she'd been reviewing. The bonding ritual? She echoed. Vladric set down his own papers, giving her his full attention. The blood exchange we've shared connects us emotionally and mentally. You can sense my feelings, and I yours. But the complete ritual would tie us together more deeply. It would extend your lifespan significantly, not immortal like a full transformation, but centuries instead of decades. It would grant you some of my strength and resilience, and it would make the bond truly unbreakable. Why are you asking now? Because I don't want you to feel pressured. We have time. But Delilah, I need you to know that I want this. I want you by my side, not just for the years a human would have, but for as long as you're willing to stay. I want to show you centuries of sunsets, yes. I know we live underground, but I can take you to the surface at night. I want to teach you everything I know and learn everything you have to teach me. I want to build a life with you that's measured in ages, not years. Delilah's heart swelled. Through the bond, she could feel his sincerity, his hope, his fear that she might refuse. What would the ritual involve? We'd need to exchange blood 3 times during a full moon cycle. The 3rd exchange would be the deepest, and it would hurt. Your body would be changing, adapting to accommodate the bond, but I'd be with you through every moment of it. And when it was done, you'd be my true consort in every sense of the word. Would I become a vampire? No, you'd remain human, but enhanced. You'd still need food and sleep, though less than before. You'd be able to tolerate sunlight, which I can't. But you'd be stronger, faster, and you'd age very slowly. Maybe a year for every decade that passes. Delilah stood and crossed to where Vladric sat behind the massive desk. She perched on the edge of it, taking both his hands in hers. I have one condition. Worry flickered across his face and through the bond. Name it. I want my family to know everything. The risks, the process, what it means. I won't hide this from them or let them think I'm making this choice lightly. They deserve to understand. Relief washed through the bond so strongly it made her breath catch. Of course. We'll tell them together. Answer every question. I'd never ask you to keep secrets from the people you love. Then yes, Delilah said, cupping his face in her hands. Yes, I want to complete the bond. I want centuries with you. I want everything. Vladric pulled her into his lap and kissed her with a passion that still made her head spin. Even after months together, every touch felt electric. She could feel his joy through the bond, a brilliant golden warmth that mirrored her own. The ritual took place over the course of 3 nights, each one timed to the moon cycle. The first 2 exchanges were relatively simple. They shared blood the way they had several times before, and Delilah felt the bond between them strengthen and deepen. By the 2nd exchange, she could hear his thoughts if he projected them directly to her, and he could sense her emotions with perfect clarity. The 3rd exchange was different. It took place in a ceremonial chamber deep within the palace, witnessed by Vladric's most trusted advisors and, at Delilah's request, her family. Seraphine, fully recovered from her injuries, stood nearby with medical supplies just in case. This will be intense, Vladric warned, holding Delilah's hands as they knelt facing each other on the carved stone floor. Your body is going to change on a cellular level, but I'll be with you the entire time. If you need me to stop, just say the word. I won't need you to stop, Delilah said firmly. I trust you. The third exchange began the same as the others. Vladric's fangs pierced her throat, and she felt the familiar rush of pleasure. But then he drew deeper, taking more blood than before, and she felt something in her shift. Her heart rate spiked, then slowed to a rhythm that felt wrong, too slow for a human. Her vision sharpened until she could see individual dust motes floating in the air. Sounds that had been muted became clear. She could hear her mother's rapid heartbeat across the room, could hear water running in pipes behind the walls. Then the pain hit. It felt like her entire body was being rewritten, every cell screaming as it adapted to something new. Delilah couldn't stop the cry that tore from her throat, but Vladric was there immediately, pulling her against his chest, his wrist pressed to her lips. Drink, he commanded gently. Take my blood. It will ease the transition. Delilah drank, and his blood was sweet and dark and powerful. She felt it spread through her system like liquid fire, but this fire healed instead of destroyed. The pain receded, replaced by a sense of strength she'd never experienced. Her muscles felt coiled, ready. Her mind felt sharper, clearer. When she finally pulled back from his wrist, licking the wound closed by instinct, she felt different, changed, more. How do you feel? Vladric asked, searching her face anxiously. Delilah took stock of herself. Her heart was beating again, but slower and stronger than before. Her senses were heightened. She could smell the various perfumes and scents of everyone in the room, could hear conversations happening floors above them. But she didn't feel like a vampire. She felt human still, just amplified. I feel powerful, she admitted. Is this permanent? Yes. Vladric smiled, relief evident in every line of his body. The bond is complete. You're my true consort now, by magic and blood and choice. Welcome to the next chapter of your very long life. The months that followed were perhaps the happiest of Delilah's life. She discovered that the enhanced strength and senses from the completed bond weren't just parlor tricks. They allowed her to navigate the vampire world with confidence. She could defend herself if needed, could sense threats before they manifested, and she healed from injuries at a rate that shocked her parents when she accidentally burned her hand on a tea kettle and watched the wound close within minutes. Her thesis work evolved into something new. She began documenting vampire art history, discovering that many of the great masters throughout human history had been either vampires themselves or influenced by vampire patrons. Vladric gave her access to private collections that no human had seen in centuries, and her research became groundbreaking in ways the human academic world would never understand. She and Vladric developed routines. Mornings, which they defined arbitrarily since they lived underground, were for individual work. She'd study or paint while he dealt with administrative duties. Afternoons were spent together, either training he was teaching her to fight properly or simply enjoying each other's company. Evenings were for court functions, though they were becoming less frequent as Vladric's position solidified. Nights were theirs alone, spent in conversation or comfortable silence or increasingly passionate embraces. 6 months into their completed bond, Vladric took her to the surface for the first time since her transformation. They emerged through a hidden exit into a forest preserve at midnight, the stars blazing overhead. Delilah gasped at the beauty of it, at how much more vibrant everything seemed with her enhanced senses. I wanted to show you something, Vladric said, taking her hand and leading her through the trees. They walked for perhaps 20 minutes before emerging into a clearing. A small house stood there, rustic but charming, with solar panels on the roof and gardens surrounding it. What is this? Delilah asked. It's yours, ours. Vladric looked almost nervous. I know you love the palace, but I also know you miss the surface world sometimes. I had this built for us. It's secured, warded against intruders, but it's private, a place where we can come when court politics become too much, where you can garden in the moonlight or paint by starlight, where we can just be Vladric and Delilah, not king and consort. Tears pricked Delilah's eyes. You built me a house. I built us a home, he corrected. Because you've made my existence something more than duty and endless years. You've made it a life worth living. And I wanted to give you something that shows you I understand what you've sacrificed. You gave up your human life, your plans, your normal future. I can't give those back, but I can give you this, a piece of the surface world, a place that's just ours. Delilah threw her arms around his neck, pulling him down for a kiss that conveyed everything she couldn't put into words. Through the bond, she felt his love for her, vast and deep and unwavering, and she sent her own feelings back to him, letting him feel how completely he'd won her heart. They explored the house together, and Delilah discovered he'd thought of everything. There was a studio with northern-facing windows for her art, though they'd need to keep the curtains drawn during the day. A library stocked with both ancient tomes and new releases. A kitchen far more modern than anything in the palace. A bedroom with a massive bed and windows that could be shuttered if Vladric needed to stay through daylight hours. "This is perfect," she breathed. "When can we move in?" Vladric laughed. "We'll split our time. The palace is still our primary residence. There are duties I can't neglect. But we can come here whenever we want. This is our sanctuary." They christened the house that night, making love in the big bed with moonlight streaming through the windows. The bond between them hummed with shared pleasure and emotion. Afterward, lying tangled together, Delilah traced patterns on Vladric's chest. "I never thought I'd be happy about that forced marriage," she admitted quietly. "I was so angry, so scared. I thought my life was over. And now? Now I think it was just beginning. I think somehow, through ancient laws and political necessity, the universe conspired to put me exactly where I needed to be. With you." Vladric pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I will spend the next several centuries making sure you never regret this choice." "I already don't," Delilah said simply. "I love you, Vladric Godfrey, not because a law forced us together or because a bond ties us. I love you because of who you are, because you're honorable and kind, and you make me want to be braver than I ever thought I could be. And I love you, Delilah," Vladric replied, his voice rough with emotion. "You walked into my life and reminded me what it means to truly live rather than just exist. You challenged me, stood beside me, defended me when you had every reason to hate me. You are my queen in every way that matters." The years that followed proved them both right. Delilah's family visited regularly, and while her parents aged in the normal human way, she aged so slowly that within a decade, she and her mother looked like sisters rather than parent and child. It was bittersweet, watching them grow older while she remained young, but Vladric had prepared her for it. They made the most of the time they had. Marcus eventually married, and his children called Delilah their fairy godmother aunt, who never seemed to get older and told the best stories. She was there for birthdays and holidays, maintaining her connection to her human family even as her life became increasingly entwined with the vampire world. The political situation stabilized. Other territories saw the strength of Vladric's rule and his willingness to defend what was his, and challenges became rare. Lazarus eventually died in an unrelated conflict with the northern territories, and the Western Kingdom was absorbed into a larger coalition that proved more diplomatic. Delilah's role evolved from reluctant bride to respected consort to a force in her own right. She became an advocate for improving vampire-human relations, establishing programs that allowed humans to learn about vampire culture and vice versa. Her unique position, human by birth, enhanced by the bond, trusted by the vampire king, made her the perfect bridge between worlds. She and Vladric continued to split their time between the palace and their surface house. Some of Delilah's favorite memories were of quiet nights in their sanctuary, painting while Vladric played piano, the music drifting through the open windows into the forest beyond. 20 years after their marriage, Vladric surprised her with a trip to Italy. They spent weeks there, visiting the places she'd only written about in her abandoned thesis. They stood in churches where Caravaggio's paintings still hung, and Vladric told her stories about meeting the artist, about the vampire court's secret patronage of Renaissance masters. "I wish I could have known you then," Delilah said as they strolled through Florence at midnight, the city quiet and beautiful around them. "I wish I could have seen you in your original time." "I'm glad you didn't," Vladric replied. "I was different then. Harder, more focused on power and survival. I needed centuries to become the man you fell in love with. And you needed to be born in an age where a woman could be educated, independent, strong enough to stand beside a king as an equal. We met exactly when we were meant to meet." At 50 years old, though she looked barely 30, Delilah had long since finished multiple degrees, published several groundbreaking books on vampire influence in human art history, and become a skilled diplomat in her own right. She'd negotiated treaties, hosted delegations from other territories, and even faced down threats alongside Vladric when necessary. Their bond had deepened to the point where they could communicate entire conversations without speaking aloud, where they knew each other's moods and thoughts with perfect clarity. They'd had fights. Of course, 5 decades together meant disagreements were inevitable. But they'd learned how to navigate conflict, how to give each other space when needed. how to come back together stronger. On their 50th wedding anniversary, Vladric threw a celebration that lasted 3 days. Vampires came from every territory to honor the couple whose bond had become legendary. Humans came too, members of Delilah's extended family, researchers she'd worked with, artists and historians who'd benefited from her unique access to vampire culture. During the formal reception, Vladric stood before the assembled crowd with Delilah at his side and made a proclamation that shocked everyone. 50 years ago, an ancient law forced me to take a bride I'd never met, a human woman who had every reason to hate me, to resist this bond, to make both our lives miserable. Instead, she chose grace. She chose courage. She chose, eventually, to give me a gift I never thought I'd receive again: love. True, honest, transformative love. He turned to Delilah, taking both her hands in his. You are my consort, my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. And I want the world to know that if I could go back to that moment 50 years ago, I wouldn't change a single thing. Because every day with you has been a gift. Because you've made 5 decades feel like a beginning, not an ending. Because I love you more now than I did yesterday, and I'll love you more tomorrow than I do today. Tears streamed down Delilah's face as she looked up at the vampire king, who'd become her everything. You gave me a life I never imagined. Adventures I never dreamed of. A love that transcends anything I thought possible. I was so angry when this started, so sure I'd hate you forever. But you proved that sometimes the things we don't choose become the things we can't imagine living without. I love you, Vladric. For the next 50 years and the 50 after that, and however many more were granted. The crowd erupted in applause, but Delilah barely heard it. She was too focused on Vladric as he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with the same passion he'd shown on their first real kiss 50 years ago. Through the bond, she felt his joy, his love, his absolute certainty that they were meant for each other. As the celebration continued around them, Delilah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She'd been forced into marriage by an ancient law, terrified and angry and convinced her life was over. Instead, she'd found a partner who respected her, challenged her, loved her with an intensity that still took her breath away. She'd built a life that spanned 2 worlds, that combined her human warmth with vampire strength, that let her be exactly who she was meant to be. The forced marriage had become a true partnership. The reluctant bride had become a willing queen, and the vampire king who'd needed a political solution had found something far more valuable: a love that would last centuries. Later that night, back in their private chambers, Delilah stood at the enchanted window that showed the stars she loved. Vladric came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Happy? He murmured, deliriously. Delilah replied, leaning back into his embrace. You know, I used to dream about what my life would be like. Normal dreams, a career, maybe a family eventually, growing old in some quiet town. This is nothing like those dreams. Regret it? Not even a little. This is better than anything I imagined, because I couldn't have imagined you. Couldn't have imagined this love or this life or how full my heart could feel. That law that forced us together ended up being the best thing that ever happened to me. Vladric turned her in his arms, his silver eyes glowing with emotion. And to me, I thought I'd live forever alone, locked in duty and memories of loss. You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to believe in forever again. Forever, Delilah repeated, the word feeling right. That's a long time. Not nearly long enough, Vladric whispered before capturing her lips in a kiss that held 50 years of history and centuries of promise. In the end, the forced marriage that had seemed like a prison became the foundation of a love story that spanned ages. The reluctant human bride became a vampire queen in all but name, respected and loved by both worlds. And the vampire king, who'd bound himself to a stranger out of political necessity, found himself bound by something far stronger, genuine, transformative, eternal love. Their story wasn't what either of them had planned. It wasn't what they'd chosen in the beginning. But it became exactly what they both needed. Proof that sometimes destiny works in mysterious ways, and that the best love stories are the ones we never see coming. Delilah spent the rest of that anniversary night in Vladric's arms, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she belonged, with exactly who she was meant to be with, living a life that was extraordinary in every possible way. The ancient law had brought them together, but love, real, hard-won, deeply earned love had made them inseparable, and they had centuries ahead of them to keep writing their story, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of love at a time. Forever wasn't nearly long enough, but it was a beautiful place to start.